fossil fuels. So if you buy the mask mandates and the lockdown mandate science, you must accept the climate science that says sell your car and lock down to save Mother Earth. Recycle. Throw your kids in the recycling bin. That's what they're essentially saying. So before you start telling everyone else to go to jail, ubiquitous home incarceration, why don't you self incarcerate? Because that's where this leads. And it's like, if they're going to pave the road to hell with good intentions, that's cool, but let them go first. I'll lock down when you do. And if you don't want to lock down, go to infiniteplane.media and pick up an Infinite Plane Radio press pass.
You just auto believe everything like I knew that you would. In my dream, you know I ain't got time, baby, for another crisis actor with soulless eyes.
My buddy, my buddy and me.
Telecommunications Act of 1996.
96, y'all.
Gonna filter your eyes and scrub your mind. The weatherman, he's just another bad joke.
All right, first commenter says, your voice sounds a bit scratchy. I hope you're feeling better, Tim. Well, that was from a few days ago. That was actually a replay from a day and a half ago, so hopefully I've recovered. P Trippa 103 says, hello, Tim. Thanks for notifying. Oh, you know what? Thank you. I forgot. There are supposed to be notifications going out via text. I send out newsletter notifications, and if you didn't know, we are back on Mixlr, which is a very great audio streaming platform with its own built-in app. So if that's something you'd be interested in using, it has a built-in notification mechanism there and a chat, a persistent chat. So if someone isn't there when you leave a message, your chat stays up so other people might respond later. So it's another think tank, just kind of there on the fringe. Again, I'm sending out text message notifications, so one moment here. If you want those, go to Infinite Plane Media. And that's because, as we all know, the notifications from YouTube are not reliable. They have a vendetta against us. I don't know why. That could be said for a lot of platforms. A lot of people on Twitter have blocked me. I have a very impressive blocked list. Like, I am more impressed by the people who have blocked me than anything. It says something about, well, I'm not really sure what it says. Dan Simmons says, love that guy, what a talent. That would be Chief Crow and the Flat Earth Worms. Brogetta says, been a minute since I caught you live. Yeah, you won't miss it if you sign up on Mixlr or if you get the text message notifications. And that's going to be a normal thing. I have that as part of my routine. It's really the best way to reach people. Emails, it takes a few minutes sometimes. Zareth the Alchemist says, I was just watching a trailer for The Eternals about a group of souls sent to protect humanity from the deviants, like the IPR think tanksters. The deviants here don't like free thought. Fascinating. The phrase deviant and variant are kind of interesting to me. I think there's another TV show, I think it's called Loki, where they're hunting the variants. The variants would be the ones that, it's like in Blade Runner, the replicants. They always have a name for the outsider, the ones that they push to the fringe. Alright, let me see here. Phones are not quite working yet, but that's not a big deal. There's a whole lot of things to talk about tonight. More information about this recent World Stage production over there about an hour north of where I sit. I'm talking about the Rust movie event, the incident. I'm hesitant to call it a murder or an accident. I don't have enough information to conclude that it was actually a murder and not a movie within a movie within a movie. and nor do you. And that's just something to keep in mind. We don't have all the information. Like, for example, with the Gabby Petito disappearance story, many found it interesting to find that Gabby was involved in Sandy Hook. Now, she wasn't one of the murdered children, but she was in a music video about the event after the fact, and the lyrics were even somewhat ironic when it came to her own disappearance. So this has been commented on. Okay, a Sandy Hook connection with the Gabby Petito story. Well, number two, another connection, the medical examiner who examined Adam Lanza to see if he was on drugs was brought out to comment on the state of, or what we would expect, the state of Gabby Petito's body to be in. So you have two tie-ins now to Sandy Hook, the music video and the medical examiner. Well, here it gets one step weirder. This was posted by Green Sage. It has finally occurred to me that Brian Landry is Noah Posner. The eyebrows have it. Crisis actor exposed, question mark. So this is a very strange one. It's a very bizarre topic in itself, this idea of staged events that are presented as real, and the public is so dumbed down and brainwashed, they just can't really figure it out. They don't believe that the mass media can lie. So in their naivety, all these fake events get passed off as real, and we find that they recycle so many of the actors. Well, one of the actors, or alleged actors, basically has resurfaced as Brian Landry, according to this theory. I don't think it's all that far-fetched. Further comments have suggested that other members of that family are involved in the Landry Gabby Petito disappearance psyop. Nothing surprising there. Just like with this Rust movie, you have a number of repeated themes, like the Bruce Lee, Brandon Lee event now ties in with this, these staged deaths. Also, the theme or the general plot of Rust has basically a character wrongfully or accidentally murdering somebody, and Alec Baldwin's character is protecting him. So you have, again, an echo between the two, and they do this on purpose. They've blended fiction and reality perfectly, and people don't know the difference. Captain Kirk just went to space. I mean, that's how bad things are. Dan Simmons says, connected to the Clintons. Oh yeah, I've seen the memes. And there's another storyline as well. The hunt for Red October connects Baldwin to the victim and the place of her birth in a very interesting way, deep in the subtext. And here we have another Tom Clancy movie, which we're caught up in the middle of, just as was the case, after 9/11, and then COVID was basically Dark Winter. Okay, here's another piece to the puzzle. They added a scapegoat. So if you look at the screen, it's not a hot topic emo gothic model, but it looks like one. This is the person who handed him the gun, essentially. And according to the story, she's known for being reckless. She's the newest armorer. She's young. She's 22, 23 or something. She handed a gun to an 11-year-old once. So here she is with an upside down cross on her shirt, and it says, always a sinner, never a saint. Oh no, she's 24, which is a mirror of course, 42, the age of the person she shot. She's leaning against a brick wall, very Mason-y. I don't know what else you can make out of this other than it's your designated scapegoat for the story. And it's very much a story, and we'll continue to take this apart. So if you didn't know, here are just some of the things that stand out. The assistant director, Dave Hall, worked on the set of Crow 2000 Salvation, which is the sequel to the movie, where Brandon Lee was killed with a .44. Then you have the union members from IATSE 44 walking off the set before it happened. This, of course, echoes Bruce Lee's death Well, Bruce Lee's death during the filming of a movie Game of Death, where an actor's killed on a movie set, which foreshadows the way his son dies. Again, with the 44. Again, the hunt for Red October, and I believe it was a Hunter Moon, the time of the shooting. The movie plot mirrors Baldwin's plight. 13-year-old boy goes on the run with his estranged grandfather, an outlaw named Harland Rust. The boy accidentally killed a local rancher. Now, I was pointing this out, and I'm not quite sure what it all means, but there is an interesting connection between the appearance of the church where it happened and the same type of small church as we see in the Westworld series, and then on the set of Kanye West's album release party. So we're talking about a white church, and in Kanye's thing, they actually torched it, and he came out burning like a phoenix. Very interesting occult ritual. Marilyn Manson was there, and Marilyn Manson is in the news quite a lot right now, and it's something I wanted to touch on here, because as I've been discussing on this channel, and this is just based on our observations of the media, the year 2020, the summer in particular, was very strongly reminiscent of 1968 in a number of significant ways. And it was the mass media that really drew attention to this, but it wasn't just a way of describing things. There's something of a template at work. And 1969, we figured, would be similarly reflected in 2021 if what we were observing was strategy, if they're deliberately reusing certain narratives. Maybe there's a deeper purpose here. And sure enough, like 2020, 2021 has strongly resonated with 1969. Most obvious, I think, with the space race. Even we had on the 20th of July, even with that, we had a perfect anniversary date of the Apollo 11, when Bezos took off. By the way, they took off at 9:11 a.m. Very interesting numbers, just pointing that out. But again, my point is, it's like 1969 all over again with the space race. And then, of course, we had another Charles Manson-like event on the anniversary, which was Matthew Coleman spearing his children to death out there on the West Coast. Santa Barbara surfer instructor gone crazy because the cult leader told him to kill the children with the reptilian DNA. The theme here is cult leader sending people to do killings and radicalized New Agers. Only the radical, scary hippies of the day are on the political right. But the occurrence of this event, of the killing on the anniversary of the Charles Manson killings of '69, while these were happening, Marilyn Manson was in the news because of all the women making accusations against him for, torture, mind control, abuse, the stuff you would expect. Stuff like out of his music videos. And I don't mean to stereotype shock rockers, but he seemed to have certain predilections. So it could all be fake. But my point is, there are all these accusations. So the name Manson, associated with atrocities, is continually being brought up. So here's a new story that kind of reinforces this. Marilyn Manson's dismissal request denied. So there's a lawsuit against him by a Game of Thrones actress, and her last name is Bianco. So you have Bianco versus Manson. Now the significance here is that in '69 it was the Manson killings. It was the Bianca murders, the La Bianca. So you have La Bianca murders done by the Manson cult, and now you have the accuser, Bianco. Very similar. They resonate. Just pointing it out that oftentimes, like for example, well, in many of these events, you have what I would consider to be rhyming or kind of a callback. Definitely a lot of callbacks. Let me go ahead and continue through the comments. Lean Dion says the term coronavirus is coined in 1968. Oh yeah, many things from 2020 were right out of '68 by design. Pete Ripa says, what does analyzing the Rust movie situation further help us with? Okay, the Rust movie situation, what does it help us with? Okay, let me see here. What does it help us with? Well, this isn't church, and this isn't some sort of a self-help group. What we're doing here is we're analyzing mass media events in order to understand them. And yeah, it probably does have a bigger purpose. And that's what we're trying to discern. Like, for example, it's very interesting. At a minimum, it's interesting. But I'd find it to be curious that the victim, as in, well, one of the victims, the guy who was shot, the director's birthday is June 14th, which is Donald Trump's birthday. Now, if you know the significance of birthdays and death days when it comes to occult rituals, this would mean even more to you, I think. It's not just a coincidence that the guy who hates Trump more than anybody, he is brimming with vitriol for Trump. We're talking about Alec Baldwin, the epitome of Trump derangement syndrome, and a Trump impersonator. So that's how much he hates Trump. He becomes an effigy of Trump to be mocked and ridiculed. So the fact that he would shoot a guy with Trump's birthday, it's kind of funny. Funny, not funny. But I'm saying, I think this is all part of a bigger story here. For example, it's a very politicized thing. The right wing hates Baldwin, and they're dogpiling on this whole situation, not even caring about the victim. Now, as far as what does it mean in the bigger picture, well, we're talking about the phenomenon of death fakers, of ritualistic staged deaths in plain sight. And these are all part of the same fictional universe that contains events like 9/11 as being 100% real as presented. These occur in the same fictional universe where we had 17 years of back-to-back school shootings. And of course, in this fictional universe, those were all real. As this is also containing the Boston bombing. And so I'm just suggesting here that I think it's important to know what is fake and what is real, what is fakeable as well. Some people don't even know what's fakeable because they don't know the scope of the mass media and its power over the believers here. Zaret says maybe she really did have evidence of Hillary and the production was by design. Right, I've seen that one. I've seen that theory. It's very intriguing. Now, as far as the meaning of it, I still don't have any clear answers. We're just looking at the bigger picture. For one, it's connected to the Brandon Lee death and the Bruce Lee death. And so, do any of you think those were real? Now, let's also look at the name Brandon, because when we're analyzing the metascript, the big picture, you have to look at all the memes that are being forced out there. Yesterday, I made it a point to talk about the Kraken, how that emerged around the time that the Karen started trending and the crack pipe started popping out. All over the place. Hunter Biden, Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mike Lindell, Chet Hanks, I think, I'm not sure. But basically, forced memes used by the media to push ideas out there. And so I'm looking at even the term Brandon. Let's Go Brandon is extremely viral right now. It's insanely viral. So I found it interesting just to point this out, that this Brandon thing is viral, and Brandon Lee is now viral, and his family is actually talking about this event. Again, Brandon Lee also killed with a 44 on a movie set. So let's go Brandon Lee. What's the connection here? Or is there one? So against the backdrop of this, someone sends me a video where there was an assassination plot against Trump by a guy from Brandon, Florida. So, taken together, maybe we're seeing something, a foreshadowing of something. And that's been a theory, it's been a picture that's been put together by the channel Jurassic Liars 26. And he's the one who really pointed out a number of these birthdays, which are very conspicuous. Like, for example, 10/28, a happy birthday, Bill Gates. And I think it's also, yeah, it is. It's the date, the anniversary date of Elvis Presley taking a vaccine on TV, which was kind of a first, I think, for celebrities. Okay, so anyway, someone had asked me, what's the point, or how does it help us to understand it, or even to focus on these things? Here's the other point of it too. The mass media is constructing our history real time, and they get by with a lot of lies that get cemented into Well, they make it into cuneiform tablets after a point. If the news is older than 10 years and you question it, it's a hate crime. They've pretty much established this as a pattern. Questioning the news makes you an enemy of the state. Doesn't make you a critical thinker. Doesn't mean you recognize patterns, and these patterns are noteworthy, if for no other reason than they're how improbable they are. I mean, some of these patterns, like for example, let's say you just believe whatever you see on TV, good for you. Well, how do you explain this? After the 10/1/2017 shootings in Vegas, 50 of the same victims who were shot at reconvened 13 months later at the Borderline Bar and Grill. 13 months later, 50 of the same. And they get mowed down. Meanwhile, down the street, there's a drill being carried out by 50 actors, recreating Vegas. So you have a recreation of Vegas, and the victims of Vegas are actually getting mowed down again. Weird coincidences, I guess. But now the birthday thing, that ties in to the cult. These rituals are based on, I believe, a few of everything else that ties it together. The main thing is timing, time, control over time. It's specifically with the sun. Like for example, well, it's everything, not just the sun, but for example, the sun set at 8:46 p.m. on 5/25/2020 in the Twin Cities. So on the day that Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd for 8:46, the sun set that day in that area at 8:46. So that's a coincidence. Well, then you add in 9/11, again, Twin Cities. These phrases are connecting. Gemini, we just entered into Gemini. Twin Towers, Twin Cities. The Twin Towers were attacked starting at 8:46. This is why I say that Derek Chauvin 9/11 America. Mercury was rising at 8:46 on 9/11/2001. There's a lot of interesting things with the astrology, and this is not unintentional. Like, for example, on New Year's Eve, the dog star that the occultists worship is at its highest point at midnight, and then it begins its descent for the rest of the year. And this is why you count down the ball at Times Square that's falling. You're all basically praising the dog star. Only you are only given the superficial exoteric explanation, not the real meaning of it. 9/11 is the New Year's in the Coptic calendar, also significant to Sirius, and you can find a picture of Bill Clinton with a dog named Sirius on September the 11th, a year before the attacks. And the caption of the picture is Bill Clinton writing to the dog's handler, "Sirius is beautiful." And then 1 year later, Sirius the dog dies in the Twin Towers. Speaking of dogs, has anyone been able to verify whether or not Dr. Fauci is indeed doing experiments on dogs and monkeys? I've heard a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of memes. Arrest Fauci is trending, but I hesitate to jump on these things without some kind of first-hand evidence because, well, it just seems like there's a lot of fake news going around. People manufacture things all the time on both sides, and QAnons are some of the worst offenders at this. They really are. So if anybody has any information about that, okay, let us continue. A few other things I wanted to talk about. So could brain brainwashing, apparently people are actually wearing Brian Laundrie costumes for Halloween, like a laundry basket or something. Insane. But I think it's obviously a big hoax. Boris Johnson to bring nature back by feeding people to animals. We'll get into that in a second. Now, one more comment on the Gabby Petito thing. The whole point of it, I think, is a ritualistic celebration, or would you call it a celebration, or it's just their way of commemorating and honoring the transition of the seasons. And I think she represented the kidnapping of the spring maiden, Virgo personified as Persephone being taken into the underworld. I think that's what the story was. They find her body as Virgo ends. And I think that's what it's actually about. It's just a ritualistic expression of this. And you can find many pictures of Gabby Petito posing with wings behind her and one of her legs slightly bent, looking exactly like Virgo. I think it's all theater. They all came from probably the Gene Rosen School of Crisis Acting. I mean, a whole bunch of recycled crisis actors. And that's been a theme here for a minute. How many people have we talked about in the last few weeks have just been recycled crisis actors? Zareth says, did you see the latest photos from Mars? Hilarious. Apparently the planet Mars has the same great rift the Earth does. I'll have to take a look. Mars looks like a lot of places on Earth. I've seen squirrels on Mars, flies on Mars. Interesting coincidence. And, there are Mars bases all over the place. China has one. And what's more likely? What's more likely that the powers that be are going to send you to paradise millions of miles away so you can live sustainably up there, something we can't figure out how to do down here. Or they're going to send you to China and you're so brainwashed, you're just going to be working on a potato farm, thinking you're on Mars. I think this has all been a communist revolution, and I'm talking about the space program. The communists were trying to figure out, how do we get these capitalists to give up their dependence on owning property, including their own minds and their own bodies, their own time. And they used environmentalism to coerce most people out of the idea that this lifestyle is good or sustainable or worth holding on to. They've used endless propaganda to disabuse anyone of the idea that capitalism is anything other than ruinous and destructive to the whole world. So they've put that out there in the culture, and the solution, of course, is going green and building sustainable habitats in outer space as we go multi-planetary to avoid the inevitable climate catastrophe. So we have this Noah's Ark situation already in progress, and people have already figured this is the way we have to do it. Well, it's convenient for the communists that the outer space lifestyle approximates their Marxist workers' paradise. And all the propaganda supports this as well. It's space communism. And this was how they tricked the capitalists. Because the capitalists are smart enough to see, okay, environmentalism is just a cover for communism. Watermelon Marxism, green on the outside, red on the inside. But they don't get it that when they go to the red planet, it's not because of the achievements of capitalism and technology fueled by the marketplace. No, the red planet is actually just, I think, their goal for everyone, an agrarian reformation. And it's red in the communist sense, not red in the Martian atmosphere sense. It's actually both. Space communism, I think, is the goal. And I think they intend to implement it here as well. And this has all been talked about by the space papacy. Jeff Bezos back in 2017 was talking about the need to lock down, to freeze civilization here on Earth, to save it. That freedom and liberty can only be maintained if we go to space. And I'll bring up some quotes so you can see that the technocrats have been planning this for a long time. But my point being, they managed to convince people that space equals progress, when, no, I think it's just a way to get a lot of space between you and freedom. Quarantining you somewhere, some gulag out there. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of spaceflight. Jeff Bezos links Blue Origin to saving Earth. And the basis of this is that in order to preserve the idea of happiness on Earth, we're going to have to lock things down. So here's what he says. And this is back in 2017. We have two choices. We either go to space or we switch to a civilization of stasis. So what does that mean? A civilization of stasis. Think climate lockdowns, which we were prepared for with the COVID lockdowns. Bezos went further, saying over the long run, freezing civilization in place may not be an option unless we're willing to become more authoritarian. So, again, he continues to say that being able to use as much energy as we want is just not consistent with liberty and freedom. So this has already been put out there. I also want to point out that this speech, which is at geekwire.com, you can listen to it yourself, was delivered to a group of toddlers who didn't have a clue. But I think that would be their future. Wait till they find out what Astrocrete is, what they're actually going to make the Moon and Mars bases out of. Astrocrete, ground up humans mixed with lunar dust. Going through some comments, Jordan says, the important thing is not conclusions, make your own. It's about codes and number riddles. Oh yeah, look, I don't know the meanings of any specific numbers other than usage. I see the patterns. That's one of the reasons why we've been able to unmask the media's tactics, specifically when it comes to the employment of crisis actors. P. Trippa says, this is one of your most plausible claims, the link of everything with climate change and space exploration. Oh yeah, they put it out there. I've been following the trajectory of the space age as it progresses, as we descend into it. And I think it goes darker than that. I mean, I don't want to say, I'll give you a spoiler alert. I think that deep space might be deep underground. Boris Johnson says, quote, bring nature back by feeding people to animals. So he was joking, of course, because they're always joking about this stuff. He jokingly suggested feeding human beings to animals to bring nature back. So they were talking about how animals were being displaced by civilization or something. Miss Steele said to the audience, 97% of the mass of mammals on the planet are human and are domestic animals. Only 3% is left for the wild. So Bojo comes out and says it's sad. Maybe we could feed some of the humans to the animals. And now think about this. You think it's a joke, but the future, if you ask me, is domed, enclosed, smart, sustainable cities protected from space junk and asteroids, and the unvaxxed. And outside of the domed, enclosed cities, you have the unvaxxed, the barbarians. They'll probably call you Neanderthals. And what they'll do is they'll probably just open up the zoos. So now the humans are in the zoos, controlled by the technocrats, and nature's allowed to repair itself. And maybe they'll just let Mother Nature deal with everyone. I've been reading a Kindle book where this is basically the story, where all of these domed, enclosed cities are connected by hyperloops. And that you don't get into these cities, you're in a closed system and everybody's tracked, but they're safe. And the people who don't want to comply are free not to comply, but they don't get to mix in with the rest of society. And this is, I think, the blueprint for the future. The rewilding. And so when Boris Johnson suggests that the people could be dealt with by animals, it just makes me think, for a flippant remark like that to be on the tip of his tongue, that's probably what he and his buddies talk about, behind closed doors. And now it's just more and more out in the open. All right, let's see. I'm going through comments. If you are in Discord or Twitch or YouTube, I'll be checking all the comments there. We're joined by Garrett Summers, Frontman 242, Pippi Langstruff. Glad to see everyone here. All right, let's go further down this particular rabbit trail. Climate change skepticism is a psychological coping strategy. I love all this projection. To me, again, I made this very clear many times, the climate change, which used to be global warming, but that didn't happen, it's 33 years old now, and the agenda has been pretty much to replace the angry God construct. Governments love God-fearing citizens, but you got a bunch of atheists running around who don't believe in God. They've been educated out of it, so now they've replaced that with the globe, and their wickedness and their behaviors can actually trigger a response from this new replacement God. So the globe, as it heats up, is basically a barometer of God's wrath, and if God gets triggered enough, deluge, flood. It's an old story. They've recycled it, and so now you have atheists who actually fear God. And then they brought out COVID the devil, which has brought about a puritanical revision of society. The virus is a new iteration of the archaic construct sin, and it allows the priesthood to regulate society the same. So they've replaced holy water with hand sanitizer. The religious garments, the masks, it's all the same. It's just a new face of an old program, if you ask me. And judging by the way the anti-vaxxers celebrate the death of the anti-vaxxers who catch COVID, I would say that this is a very extreme and almost violent religion or ideology, where it's COVID Akbar whenever some right-winger catches COVID and dies, and they almost celebrate. Well, they do celebrate it on a number of sites I could point at. I mean, we've seen this for months now. So, what do they care about more? Saving the planet, pleasing their angry God, or punishing the infidel and celebrating the power of their devil? And I would say that the worshippers of scientism are really leaning towards devil worship in that sense these days. This is from ScienceAlert.com. People who believe COVID conspiracies are more likely to test positive. Fascinating take on this. This is again ScienceAlert.com. It says even if a conspiracy theory is extremely implausible according to logic or scientific evidence, it seems real to the perceiver. Now this is fascinating that they're establishing a link here, because not all conspiracy theories are the same. Some conspiracy theories suggest that there is no virus, that it's just a construct to regulate the sheeple, and that would be myself. Others say it was a weapon from China. Others suggest it's coming from 5G towers. Various theories, but I'm actually surprised that you have the critics of it catching it. So I'm more inclined to think that the high-profile COVID victims from the anti-vax side are more than likely crisis actors. Now, we've had a number of examples that were high profile. Recently, even a flat earther went to a Bible flat earth conference called Take on the World. This is Rob Skiba. And he caught COVID, spent 40 days on a ventilator, and died, according to the reports. Now we have Mac Parhar, a flat earth F word, allegedly infected with COVID. I mean, that's what the media is saying. He says it's not. He's driving around swilling Tylenol and hacking phlegm out his windows. But he says it's definitely not COVID. He's out there in Canada. But again, I find that story to be very questionable because he's he's been making headlines for more than a year and a half now. So if Mac Parhar, the flat earth F word, is taken down by COVID-19, it will be used as a cautionary tale, as an example. Like, here's what happens when you disregard our quarantine orders. Here's a guy who's going to spend life in jail for violating quarantine or something like that. Very heavy penalties. And if he dies of, here's the thing. The anti-vaxxers will call it poetic justice. They'll say COVID Akbar and they'll celebrate it online. There's no sympathy for people who supposedly just want to save the world. All right, going through comments again. If you want to get on the newsletter, go to infiniteplane.radio, and also if you go to darkmatter.radio, we're using a new player from Mixlr if you just want the audio. Jordan says Mac is the only person on Earth that knew that one dude. That's correct. That one dude, Benjamin Orion Carlson Coleman, burned 3 Masonic lodges on 3/30/2021. And he did it because he said the Masons control the world, and they stamped 33 on all of their evil deeds, while he proceeds to burn down buildings on 3/30. Very unbelievable character, 42-year-old. I kind of think he's an actor. No one had ever heard of the guy. Yet he was friends, of course, with the yoga instructor, who's driving around high on Tylenol and vape. He's the only yoga instructor I know that vapes. And I don't know very many yoga instructors, but Most yoga instructors that I see online have Instagram accounts, and they're always taking pictures of themselves contorting. That's their business. And funnily enough, I cannot find one single image of this particular yoga instructor doing yoga. And if I was a yoga instructor, I wouldn't set bad examples by vaping while road raging. All right, let us continue. Xerath the Alchemist says if he goes to jail, they'll give him the jab. Oh. Garrett Summers says, I feel it will be like Nazi Germany. What it must have been like for people to watch others be taken away. See, I don't think they'll go there. There's this fear that they're going to take us away. This is a common thing. It's spread by a lot of popular conspiracy theorists. They're going to come take us in the middle of the night. I remember on April Fool's Eve 2020, Richie from Boston had an emergency video release where he said, I'm here in my basement. I'm paraphrasing. I'm here in my basement on a stack of MREs, Bible in one hand, gun in the other. The New World Order is going to come, kick down my door, and drag me away and vax me. And they're going to shut off the internet on April Fool's Day. It was nice knowing you. So we got our farewell, and he's like, oh, by the way, 20% off on all my Richie from Boston MREs. So they're selling you on the idea that we're going to be taken away. So might as well spend your money on their food, their supplies, so you can run for the hills possibly. But they sell you on this. I'm talking about a lot of conspiracy theorists on the idea that they're going to take us away. It's going to be like that bad time back when. But the truth is, the FEMA camp of the day is the recliner in front of your TV, in front of the monolith. As long as you're facing the monolith, that black screen, you are in the FEMA camp. It's a mental thing. They want you in the metaverse. You're in the matrix. They don't need to physically have you separated from other people. Most of this will be done online anyway. They are digitally segregating things. And what's more, it's less expensive to have prisoners that feed and take care of themselves and snitch on each other from their own homes. You know how you have the panopticon? It's like where the guard can see everybody. Well, they have that now. And everybody has Instagram. Everybody has access to TikTok. So we live in a total surveillance society, which they sold to us as social media. Again, look what they did. Instead of installing cameras everywhere, they sold people on filming themselves 24/7 and publishing their thoughts online 24/7. Social media is a thought reading machine. So what makes you think they're going to build more infrastructure when they could just teach you to make your home FEMA camp as comfortable as can be? So you never want to leave. And I think that's what they're doing. Well, that's what they've done. And look, if you buy the science of lockdowns for COVID, you ought to buy the science of lockdowns for the environment. So I don't really want to see any maskies with their just vaxxed patches out there at all. The die-hard believers ought to be locked up in their homes. And I would be willing to call the cops on them. Environmental criminals. Use their rules, use their own standards against them. These are your standards. I insist that you adhere to them. Sell your cars. What are you doing? You want to have another flood? You want to anger the God? All right, let me see. I'm going through comments. Frontman says Richie cannot own firearms. Well, he's got an army of defenders, and I would actually be counted among those. I think he's a legitimate, what do you want to call him? You have to have some watchdogs in society out there. People who are very aware of what can be done, if no one's paying attention. So, but to me, it's just a question of what's more immediate. And there are a few things that he and others harp on that I just don't agree on. But I'm kind of past that, don't care. Like if you're still scared of chemtrails, that's fine. I'm not going to argue against that. I think chemtrail fear is what they gave to the fringe right. And environmental catastrophe fears is what they gave to the fringe left. I think gunophobia is for the left. Needle phobia is for the right. And there's a reason for this. It's a perfect division. This is the crack and the schism I keep talking about. By the way, Richie from Boston and Russian Vids are going to be live tomorrow. I'll post a link at fakeworld.news if you want to join me in chat there. Hopefully I don't get banned. All right, let us continue. Zach Hubturd says, yoga vapors are the new it. I don't know if it's inconsistent. I'm not really too up on vaping if it contradicts it, but I think it would be weird if you go to a hot yoga thing and your yoga instructor is puffing on a Marlboro or something. If nothing else, it says something about their lack of discipline. Maxwell Cooper says, I definitely think they're spraying something, not sure why though. See, here's the logical fallacy. It's the non sequitur. They're spraying something. So, therefore, that something opens the door to all kinds of things that were never on the table before. And they don't logically follow. This is an argument used to keep the belief alive in a number of cryptids. Like, for example, there's a Bigfoot in these woods, according to the legends. So if you hear anything, it might be a Bigfoot. So if you hear a bear, well, it was never a question of was it a Bigfoot? It was just a damn bear. But they put it out there, so well, it might have been Bigfoot. And then once you have a lot of people saying might have been, then it becomes very uncertain, and some people take that as an argument ad populum, which many people find very convincing. I know people who say that. They say, well, a lot of people have seen the space station fly over their house, so I know it's there. It's like a lot of people isn't you. And if you ask people directly, like for example, McToon is a YouTube channel who routinely debunks flat earthers. And yet, he and I were talking about the space station, and he said, why haven't you seen it? You could just look out your window and see it. And I said, I've tried to see it, but I haven't seen it. Have you seen it? And he looked stunned, and he said, no, I haven't. And that just kind of hit me. I'm thinking, wait, you spend all your time defending everything from NASA, defending it from the conspiracy theories about the fake moon landing, and you've never even seen the space station? And then you're calling me out on it. It's just, like I said, a lot of people are just willing to accept other people's accounts, hearsay. All right, let me see here. Pippi Langstruth says, if smoking marijuana causes short-time memory loss, what does smoking marijuana do? Zerth says, I forget. Has anyone figured out what this story is about? There's some secret JFK files, and Biden won't allow them to be released. This is from earlier today. Politico. President Joe Biden has once again delayed the public release of thousands of government secrets that would shed light on the 1963 assassination. This is a fascinating topic in itself. We talked about dates and numbers with the Rust killing. Here's an example of dates and numbers being totally encoded into an event. And I happen to think it's plausible, and I actually got this from chartword.com. You can actually find him on Twitter, but look up chartword.com and JFK, and his breakdowns are incredible, suggesting that the JFK assassination is a movie, more or less. It was a psyop, and it was directed with the help of Kubrick. It's a Kubrick production. Now that sounds wild and out there in terms of speculation, but Kubrick has already been pointed at as the guy who did Apollo 11. But here's where it gets kind of compelling. The Doctor Strangelove movie's premiere was on 11/22/63, which was JFK's death date. That's kind of a clue right there. Another movie he put out, Eyes Wide Shut, his final movie, was released on 7/16/99, which is the anniversary of 7/16 is the death date of RFK. John F. K. Jr. So you have John F. K. Jr.'s death date and JFK's death date tied in to these movies. And it just starts with that. But there are many things that would connect the release dates and key scenes in various Kubrick films to not only the Kennedy assassination and Apollo 11, and many are familiar with that one if you've seen Room 237. But there are many things in Kubrick's films that actually point to his involvement in scripting 9/11 and stuff beyond, including things that alluded to 2020. But looking at this, a couple of other things. If you've read King Kill 33, it's one of the first articles of its kind, I believe, really breaking down the ritual significance of that event. And in that one, it's by James Shelby Downard. He describes this event as actually being framed in the context of a killing of a king, a ritualistic killing of the king of Camelot, as a subtext. All part of what he called a ritual, a killing of the king ritual, a sacrifice. Fascinating stuff. Again, 11/22/63. And I'm pointing this out because last year, in 2020, there were two things that involved Derek Chauvin, just to go back to him really quick, that have interesting dates that are noteworthy in this context. One, Derek Chauvin had a hearing on 9/11, which was the 19th anniversary of 9/11. And then when he was let go there at Hennepin County before he was on trial, they let him go at 11:22 a.m. And when they let him go, his most recent mugshots had this asymmetry to his face, and he looked very Oswaldy. And I don't think these were unintentional. The linking of him with Oswald. All these characters are interlinked, interconnected in interesting ways. But anyway, getting back to the John F. Kennedy assassination. So apparently there are some documents about this event that Biden does not want released, citing that it would be harmful. Here's what he said. Postponement is necessary to protect against identifiable harm to the military defense, intelligence operations, law enforcement, or the conduct of foreign relations. This is of such gravity that it outweighs the public interest in immediate disclosure. So there's a delay over the information that's going to be released. Now, here's another connection that you might find interesting with Stanley Kubrick and the JFK thing. So there is this account of Oswald working at Riley Coffee Company before the shooting. So people found it interesting. What was he doing before this event? So he's working at this place called Riley's Coffee. And all of the people who were working with him were more or less drafted to go work for Boeing or NASA. So they kind of went to go work for the space program. Oswald, according to a letter that he sent to someone at that time, seemed to be under the impression that he too was going to go work at NASA. So just to put it in context, Oswald's working with a bunch of individuals at a coffee place, and they're all going to move to NASA. Sounds very agenty. But instead of going to the moon, what does Oswald do? He shoots Kennedy. Now, a minute ago I said that Kubrick directed the Kennedy assassination. Kubrick directed Apollo 11. So the common denominator here is NASA and Kubrick involved. And so NASA just seems to be far beyond just a space program, but mind control central for staging the psyops, the major transformative psyops of our time. We're talking about 9/11, COVID, we're talking about the Kennedy assassination, and all the events that trigger major wars, etc., all coming from the same centralized studio. So I don't think it's accurate to say Stanley Kubrick directed Apollo 11 or Stanley Kubrick directed 9/11. No, I'm saying he was one of the primary geniuses over there at that time, covertly working for the government, producing psychodrama for the masses. Now, someone here says Q is a distraction, and I understand where you're coming from with that, but it's part of the world stage right now, and this is where Q comes into the story. Is QAnoners quite literally believe that Q is JFK, and this is where it gets so crazy. This is as crazy as I've ever, as crazy a conspiracy theories I've come across. Way stranger than reptiles. But basically, the idea is that JFK survived his head wound, and that the Antichrist, Revelations 13:3, survives his head wound, and the world is amazed. So the QAnoners say, hey, the deep state modified the Bible. They Mandela affected it. Basically, it's supposed to be Christ comes back, has a head wound, but survives. So they have managed to turn the Kennedys into this almost a divine family, divinated, a divine cult, where now they're believing that it's the bloodline of Christ and that Kennedy survived his head wound and that he's going to come back, not just Junior, I'm talking about Kennedy Sr. So you're going to have a 104-year-old zombie taking over very soon, if Q gets their way. And if you don't think Q is serious, look at their last rally. It's all about Q, even if they don't say it openly. So this is the thing. The belief is that there's a secret plan to beat back all the evil of the world, and it's being led by the Kennedys. And that JFK Jr. is going to return as Donald's vice president. So you have that, then you have other elements, but that's the big picture. That Q is, and so here's the thing. As ridiculous as that sounds, and as ignorable as it sounds, there may be something to it in this bigger picture, the bigger narrative of a returning king. And of course, we're looking at a psychological operation. And that's my point. I'm not saying it's real. I'm saying they're creating something that people will think is real. I mean, do any of you believe the official story of 9/11? About the bad guys they invented and what they did? Probably not. But they needed the belief of a sufficient number of people. So they have a delusional political religious cult who are waiting for a savior who they believe to be quite literally the second coming of Christ. Now, a few other things that could tie into it, and there are many things that could substantiate this as part of a psyop again, is that the Stanley Kubrick narrative here with chartword.com and his involvement in staging or writing a lot of these things actually has him forecasting some of this in some of his movies. And Eyes Wide Shut, according to some analysis which I've seen, is actually about JFK Jr. And I think that this also extends, because this is played by Tom Cruise. So you can't really overstate the importance of this, of Tom Cruise working with Stanley Kubrick. It's very significant given that Tom Cruise is actually going to be participating in the space program, going to the space station any week now. The Russians beat him to it with their challenge that they just filmed, but he's still going. So I think his connection there is worth exploring, also considering his role in the new space religion. Scientology is part of the new paradigm. It's consistent with it. It's not going to be eradicated like the other old religions. Will eventually probably be phased out. But again, my point is, in the movies, these things are projected in advance, as we often point out. And so, for example, the movie Vanilla Sky has a subtext that I think continues along this line. I'll start off by saying that it opens with a scene downtown New York, quarantined. Nobody's on the streets. So it looks like 2020. And Cruise is running down the streets in a panic. Then he wakes up because it was just a dream, and he's in bed, and he and his girlfriend both have a cold. And they laugh. I don't know why people laugh. I mean, why would you laugh if I have a really bad cold and then you start laughing? That's what they do in the movie, and it's really weird. Well, now it makes sense. So you had an allusion to both corona lockdowns and the sickness at the start of the movie. Plus, the movie is replete with 9/11 style references. But what's more, and this is what I picked up when I last watched it after looking at Kubrick's work more closely. The character in the movie, David Ames, is fighting to win back his father's kingdom, which was usurped. So you have a usurped kingdom, and you have this young man who has been around the usurpers his entire life, and he knows them. and they don't take him seriously. So the subtext is, after he has an accident, they think he's gone for good. He comes back after planning his return, like the invasion of Normandy. That's what he says in the movie. And he wins back his kingdom. And of course, his name is David Ames Jr. And there's plenty of references in here. Like, he's 33. A lot of Christian, or Christ rather, Christ symbolism superimposed onto this character. But in the subtext, it also has references to a plane crash and wearing a mask and going around New York feeling isolated because nobody knows who you are. So I would say that there is something to this Q story, like it or not, because it's a continuation of everything else we've lived through, including the 9/11 and the COVID. And space junk, asteroids, all of the big psyops, the ongoing psyops that we're living through right now, are part of the same script. So you may not like a particular character, but as you can see, it continues to roll on regardless of what we think, or how fake or unbelievable it is. Alright, joined by Salty Siren. Thirst for Truth is here with the popcorn. 5 minutes of fame, says holla everyone. Unfortunately, my phones aren't working now because I'm still on a laptop. I figured it was a micro EMP burst, but about a week and a half ago, our main 24/7 streaming computer was shut down. Not a big deal. We are mirrored on Dark Matter Digital. If you go to darkmatter.radio. So if you go to infiniteplanesociety.com, there's a new player there. We use Mixlr. I recommend it highly. Mixlr is an audio player. There's a chat there. It's also a way you can get notifications when we're live, and it's the 24/7 player. I switched to Mixlr because it has better sound than what I was using before. Zaret says, the infinite plane will never crash. Tim is relentless. Wait until we get into print. And we are hiring undercover reporters. We're not going to post their faces anywhere. We're using thispersondoesnotexist.com for all of our avatars. Now, we have plans to expand what we're doing. The hardware failures are just to be expected. Okay, so again, I have not come up with a conclusion here. For some reason, Joe Biden does not want documents about JFK's assassination released, citing identifiable harm to military defense, intelligence operations, and law enforcement. So what is it? Do they have JFK with a grisly head wound in a cell somewhere? They're going to pull him out? That's what the QAnoners might be thinking. I mean, I'm not quite sure what they're going to pull out of this, but again, there are some interesting connections to Lee Harvey Oswald and Kubrick. And there's more too. If you get into Kubrick and the actors that he worked around, like George C. Scott and others, it kind of opens the door to where some of these astronauts came from. There's a highly plausible theory that Neil Armstrong was actually the Russian pilot / astronaut, first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, who died in a mysterious fiery crash in 1968, where they couldn't find his body, very much like the sun god Osiris. It's always the same story. They only found one piece of his body, a little piece of flesh with a mole on it, and some guy there said, I saw him at a bar and I saw the mole, that's how I know it's Yuri. Which doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of a strange thing. Maybe it's an inside joke. Like maybe he's a mole, as in Neil Armstrong is a Russian mole. I'm not quite sure. Alright, going through comments here. Zaret the Alchemist says JFK is in the makeup trailer. Well, it's not 100% impossible, I suppose, but to me it's just unbelievable that JFK Jr. is some kind of savior. Because all of this also hinges on the existence of the deep state, and I'm still waiting for evidence of this. I'm still waiting for proof that there is a deep state and a not so deep state. And early on, when the QAnon story started rolling out, I had started to speculate, could this be a Democrat operation to turn the right into a caricature, control them, set them up like what happened on 1/6? Looks very likely. I've seen some more footage from 1/6 as well, suggesting it was a simulated riot. But my point is, it just seemed like all these Democrats and Hollywood elites who are being targeted by this QAnon conspiracy could actually be the authors of it. All right, going through comments. Salty Siren says Q is the. Yes. Okay, this is the thing. Q is, in many ways, we're talking about a religion and this Christ kind of savior story, but if you think about it, it is internally consistent. In fact, many of them are taking the Q drops, and there are more postings by Q than utterances by Jesus. And they will take the Q drops by date and then say, hey, the Q drop from October 25th, 2017 will somehow pertain to the one from this year. And they're constantly looking back like it's prophecy in real time. So in a way, we're looking at the Q source. And so the Q source, not QAnon, but the Q source, which you can find on Wiki, is a hypothetical written collection of Jesus' primary sayings. So when it was still an oral tradition, before it had been transcribed, it was the Q source. So the QAnoners actually do see the Q drops as something of a Q source as they interpret this stuff. By the way, Eyes Wide Shut, that's the movie with Tom Cruise, is followed by Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky, and I think it's a continuation of the same story. Vanilla Sky's original title is Open Your Eyes. So you have Eyes Wide Shut and then Open Your Eyes. A couple of other interesting coincidences I came across this week, by the way. So you have RFK, Robert Kennedy, a 42-year-old, killed at the 22. This was back in 1968. This was, again, Robert Kennedy. So Robert Kennedy dies 1968, shot with the 22. The photographer was the same photographer at 9/11, as in September 11, 2001, who photographed the falling man. So you're probably familiar with the falling man. It looks like the hanged man tarot card. Well, the falling man photo was taken by Richard Drew, who also took a photo of course, RFK falling down. Just an interesting coincidence here, but another connection between a dead Kennedy and 9/11 or Kubrick production. A lot of these connections, which, again, they do put together a pretty strong composite that we're looking at a bigger picture, a bigger story. And by the way, at the end of the movie, like I said, Tom Cruise is representing JFK Jr. in the movie Eyes Wide Shut and Vanilla Sky. It's deep in the subtext. It's actually not that deep. It's in plain sight if you have the initiated interpretation. So in the movie, before he returns to the real world, he jumps off a building. So Tom Cruise, who in a subtextual way is playing a Kennedy, is a falling man. So it's kind of an interesting connection again, because the falling man was photographed by the guy who photographed a dead Kennedy. The dates tell quite a lot more. 7/16, in addition to being the release date of Eyes Wide Shut, is also the day that Apollo 11 took off from Kennedy Spaceport. So there's another Kennedy reference there. Also, I made this connection before. We have the MAGA ban, like the American Taliban, Vanilla ISIS, White Al Qaeda. I've been talking about this parallel that's been created in the minds of the masses between the right wing and the Taliban. And they have the incels, which are their suicide bombers. And these are the radicals, the domestic terrorists. And it's a repeat of the Islamic fundamentalists in their terrorist cells. But they've recreated it with incels and their basements are their caves. And instead of being radicalized by Quran verses, they're being radicalized by QAnon verses. QAnon, Quran, radical incel, neck-bearded, suicidal, sexist terrorists that want to reset society and subjugate women. It's a repeated story against the great Satan. One group wants to take down the great Satan, typified by America and its Hollywood elitists and their decadence. The other side, same thing. Pizzagate, QAnon. Got to take down the satanic cabal that controls the world, the deep state. So the great Satan narrative is actually repeated in the QAnon narrative. So there is actually a lot of similarity in the Holy War Jihadi mission and the QAnon Great Awakening Save the World, Save the Children mission. Zareth says alchemical at the roots. Now, when you talk about alchemy, a big part of alchemy is combining two into one, the synthesis of opposites to create something better. This is all their alchemical code speak, but this is why the symbol of the corona is so important, or the eclipse, because it shows the union of the two, the sun and the moon, and that is what you see at the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey. You have the monolith and the sun and the moon above it. Well, 2001, the number itself, 2001, you could look at it as 2 into 1, and the zeros as the sun and the moon. So this is one way of looking at it. Now, that came out in 1968. Fast forward 33 years, 2001, and what happens? The towers come down, and now there's one tower. It's the One World Tower. Before the COVID thing, we had Event 201. Again, another 201, and COVID was foreshadowed in several of these Kubrick films, and references are mostly to the symbol of the corona itself. The name Floyd is mentioned a few times in 2001: Space Odyssey. But anyway, my point is the idea of 2 into 1. And check out this symbolism. So you had the tower's construction begins in 68. Creation to destruction, 33 years, because they tear them down in 2001. Jesus, 33 years. You know, we're talking about the symbolism of the numbers here. The number of death and resurrection in the Kabbalah and the Tarot and all this, 13. So 13 years after 9/11, they erect the new tower. Originally, it was going to be called the World Trade Center Phoenix. And Donald Trump was actually behind that plan. Shows you how deep he is in the script. The significance of the Phoenix is that originally it was conflated, the symbolic meaning, with Christ dying and resurrecting. So you have the thing opened up 13 years later on 11/3. So 9/11, like 3/11, is these numbers 9/11, 3/11 are all over the predictive programming, as is 11/3 and 119, you know, the reverse. So it's interesting that you also have the new tower coming up on 113. It's 1,776 feet high, which is 888 times 2, and if you go into numerology, 888 is Jesus. So you could say, or Christ rather. So you could say second coming is kind of encoded into it, or resurrection. It's all very much occult. Aqua Chiron says the Roman plagiarist usurpers stole everything from the Egyptians. The Vatican is Heliopolis. Stolen obelisks are in DC, London, and the Vatican. The library burning of Alexandria is a lie. Now, the obelisk at St. Peter's Square, the one that the Pope kneels to or bows to three times a day, obelisk. Well, obelisk means shaft of Baal. That's what it means. Baal is the earth god name. Another name of Osiris. You know, I happen to think that these names mean something. Double meanings are very much encoded into all of this stuff. So the Pope goes out there at, again, St. Peter. These names are interesting. Then you have, so this is the religious side. They're worshiping the obelisk at St. Peter. What is the obelisk? That's your ticket to the heaven. That's the way. You want to make it to the heavens, you go to that. Then you have Johnson Space Center. Interesting name. And that's where you have the obelisks that you send up literally into the heavens. And if you want to escape Earth and the judgment of God, well, you better go to the Pope and pray to the obelisk. If you want to escape global warming and the judgment of globe, hop on a rocket. There's a lot of consistency here with this cult of death and resurrection and salvation. Of course, today the obelisk is now more or less the Space Needle. That's the symbol of salvation today. But it's all the same cult. And so the obelisks of old are still there symbolically. It means the same thing. But just like they've disguised communism as space travel, like the path to space utopianism, it's the ultimate in progress for freedom. No, it's slavery. Well, in the same way, they've occulted the obelisk worship with the space program, and these obelisks are now just redecorated as rockets with these fertility rites. And you can't say Captain Kirk's launch wasn't a fertility rite. He even admitted as much to Anderson Cooper. And I don't want to play the clip where he and Cooper are giggling like schoolgirls about how he was going to fly in a rocket with a really funny shape that everyone knows what it looks like, and that he was going to, quote, inseminate space. That's what Captain Kirk said. It doesn't make any sense unless you understand the fertility rite aspect of it, which I do believe ties in to the Halloween Kills movie, which, of course, the face of Michael Myers is literally William Shatner's face. Aqua Chiron says the solar cult of Dionysus. Yeah, look, we're looking at, as I would describe it, it's just an ancient cult with a space age window dressing, just a space age nomenclature. They must have came up with this. If you ask me, the genesis of this would have been Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Marjorie Cameron. Three very interesting characters. You have a science fiction writer and intelligence agent. You have the American counterpart to Aleister Crowley, and rocket scientist, who used to read the hymn to Pan at the rocket launches. And then you have Marjorie Cameron, an actress and model who was the high priestess in black magic rites, where they were attempting to incarnate the Antichrist. So the story here, though, is that at the very beginning, over there at JPL, you had a mix of Mystery Babylon put into a modern context with the help of a science fiction writer who created Scientology, which Scientology is nothing more than Crowley's religion of Thelema and OTO put into a modern context. But it's the same stuff. Same initiatory cult, just a different head of the same Hydra. So I'm just suggesting here that they invented the space religion, and they took their old religion and they encoded it, they occulted it at that time. That would be my guess. And what's more, the first person to ever report sighting a UFO was Marjorie Cameron. And this was in 1946, a year before Roswell, before the crash landing in Corona Field. So I think these are very important characters. Jack Parsons blew up in his laboratory, which I kind of don't believe. I find that hard to believe given the significance of ritualistic, fiery explosions taking out people in the space program. So, for example, you have the first one I mentioned, Neil Armstrong's original identity, Yuri Gagarin, fiery explosion. Then you had Apollo 1, fiery explosion. A lot of these immolations, when it comes to the firsts, so the first man in space, fiery explosion. This OG rocket scientist, same thing. Jack Parsons blows up. Before we go to the moon, 3 guys on the launch pad. Before we master low Earth orbit, space shuttle explodes. I think we're due for another fiery explosion. And by the way, they all happen curiously at the same time of the year. You got to look at these dates, and we'll go into all of these. In fact, we predicted one of them. Back in 2020, January of 2020, Elon Musk had, quote, sacrificed Falcon to Dragon's fire. Those are his words. And this was the exact same time, anniversary week of the Challenger explosion, Endeavour. And this was at the same time that you had the fiery in-air explosion of Kobe Bryant's helicopter, which then crashed. And then at the end of this week, I believe it was last year on the 2nd of February, Elon Musk had one of his starships explode. That was the one where they had the big 42 written on the side of the engine. And I believe they added 9 to their Raptor, so it went from 33 to 42. They're obsessed with their numerology. In fact, on that date, February 2nd, which is the 33rd day of the year, Jeff Bezos stepped down as the head of Amazon. Again, these dates are important because a bunch of witches and warlocks with OCD run this place. Why do you think Bezos took off on the anniversary of Apollo 11 at 9/11? It was a double shout out to Stanley Kubrick, the architect, one of the primary metascriptors, but he's not the only one. Like I said earlier, we're also living through Tom Clancy. We're living in a Tom Clancy novel. We're living through, I think that they're getting to Soylent Green. They're getting there. You know, Boris said yesterday, hey, we can just start feeding people to the animals so that we can bring nature back. Like, you first. I mean, that's my point. That's my take on all this stuff. Like, you guys first. If you're pro lockdown, lock down yourself for the climate first. You know, all these bad ideas they want to implement, but they want everyone else to do it first. And why do they need mandates? If you think it's a good idea, you're the last person that should need a mandate to get it started. Like, there are people who would vote for ubiquitous permanent lockdowns just because they think it's good for the environment and good for our health. But they're not going to do it unless the government mandates it and all the people who oppose it agree to go with it. It's like, if you already agree with this stuff, do it. You know, the fact that more than half the population isn't already voluntarily locked down tells us that we're surrounded by hypocrites. We're not surrounded by super spreaders, we're surrounded by hypocrites. Zareth says Fauci's wife is the one at the NIH that greenlights the human experiment, so there's that too. Don't forget, wives are just as evil. Look at Kevin Kline. Yeah, on that note, Fauci's wife, look, there's a rumor, there's a few connections, and I think I even have a mind map of it. I'll bring this out if anyone wants to see it. Suggesting that Fauci's wife is the sister of Marina Abramovich, spirit cooker for the elite. Also related to, sister of Ghislaine Maxwell, the Forrest Gump of sex traffickers. And also sister of some psychiatrist in Littleton who handled the Littleton shooters. So, yeah, definitely. It's a whole evil family there. Going through comments, see if I've missed anything. John says Fauci's a Jesuit coadjutor. Yeah, well, look, the reason I thought so from the very beginning, I called him out as such. He went to a Jesuit school, but my takeaway is this. The doctrines that we're talking about here, the idea of to be saved, you have to have the communion wafer. You have saved and unsaved. You're not saved unless you go through sacraments. Also, the belief in 1, sin, and 2, eschatology, wrath of God. Well, these are things that I believe the Jesuit, whatever you call it. I mean, I don't like to point my fingers at any one particular group. But if you're looking at some archaic worldview being reinstituted under the guise of protecting us from a medical emergency, this is it. Between the medical emergency and climate emergency, they have effectively brought back sin, wrath of God, and a priesthood to help us deal with these problems, these ubiquitous problems. Because what would we do without the climate scientists? We wouldn't be recycling, and who knows where we would be. And of course, sin. Well, there's no justification to regulate your behaviors because, well, there's no threat of hell or retribution. God's not watching. Well, suddenly, the godless atheists are holier than thou church ladies, terrified of gatherings of more than 5 people. Okay, more information about the Alec Baldwin stunt gun. Again, I brought it up. Someone pointed this out in Discord. This does deserve, I think, more scrutiny. Could Laundrie be Noah Posner? That's a very interesting claim, and it seems to be substantiated by some others around him. It's always the family members. Like Zaret said, you got to look at the wives. They're evil too. It's the family members that give these things away. Like if you don't believe that JonBenet Ramsey is Kate Perry, then you probably haven't looked at the parents, because the parents give it away 100%. The dad looks the exact same, just a little hipper. I think he's got an ear piercing. But other than that, no, there's no difference. The mother has not changed anything, aged very well. So, no, I don't think that's that unbelievable. And now here's another one from the same source, Green Sage. Noah had a twin sister named Ariel, and Brian Laundrie's sister looks exactly like her. Another glitch in the matrix. Yep, all these recycling fanatics, these greenies, are now recycling their crisis actors as well. Nothing new here. In fact, that's one of the first clues, I think. One of the first major clues we had to all of this was the recycled actors. That's what stands out more than anything. There's a lot of interesting things happening in Discord, and I'll be going through a lot of the things people post there. I don't miss any comments on the YouTube channel, so leave comments. Even though they do delete 90% of our channels within a couple weeks, I do save all the comments and I reference them later. Here's a reference if you missed this. As a teenager, Gabby Petito appeared in a video commemorating Sandy Hook victims. The song is now being re-recorded in her memory. So here's a connection, another connection to add to the the medical investigator connection, and of course the Noah connection. Very interesting. Once is coincidence, maybe 2 or 3 coincidences, but we've had so many piling up that at a minimum you have to consider this could just be an elaborate production. Like I said before, I think it was a ritualistic play, a theatrical play showing us the kidnapping of the Spring Maiden taken to Hades, a foreshadowing of our dark winter. We've all been hijacked. We're all in a van with Brian Laundrie, Brian or Brain Laundrie. We're all being brainwashed together. Stockholm Syndrome together, a captive audience being taken down to hell together. I think that's the subtext here. A couple things I wanted to bring up. If you're not on my newsletter, I recommend it because I am making an effort to put all of the most important ideas into a single page or 2 so you can get a breakdown of what is happening in the world of fake. So about the William Shatner connection to Michael Myers, just a couple of things here. 12th installment. So that's the significance here, I guess. It's the 12th movie of a knife-wielding incel in a William Shatner mask. So the symbolism here is this. On Halloween, you have these various rituals that are be done. You see it in Hollywood movies where the high priest has a knife and they sacrifice a virgin. These are all cliches bad script writing. But if you read about witchcraft and the actual practices, and it's easy to find information on it, the knife represents the god and the chalice the goddess. And at the height of the ritual, if it's PG, they put the knife in the cup. And so the symbolism there is the conjunction of the god and the goddess, or the sun and the moon overlapping. It's one of their consistent symbols. It's a fertility rite. So the significance here too is, like, you look at the names of the rockets of the space program, Apollo, Saturn. It's all about the sun god and his various representations, because every one of these different religions has a different way of representing him, but it's usually based around the same symbols in terms of the obelisk being the god of the earth. So anyway, in the witchcraft rites, the knife is then the phallic symbol, whereas the obelisk would be the symbol in these more elaborate rituals practiced by the occultists or the Pope. And in the space program, it's the rocket. So you have William Shatner, Rocket Man, and this is the connection. He even sang Rocket Man back in 1978 at the Saturn Club. Saturn is the 5th meeting of the Saturn Club. Now, so he's the Rocket Man, and then his face is the face of the Knife Man. So in this context of fertility rites, yeah, you could see the parallel here, specifically given the connection to Halloween, which deepens here. Originally, it was going to be released, they were going to launch on 10/12. They bumped it to 10/13. They said because of the weather, which I don't think there is any weather out there. So they conspicuously moved it to 10/13. And if you look into the way that the numerology is encoded into our so-called news, they often have the mirrors of these numbers. So 10/13, 10/31, there's an obvious Halloween connection. So he's Rocket Man, Halloween, and on that launch, you have the blue rocket, but the flame was bright orange. You can look at it yourself. This has never been the case with any of their launches. They made it orange for some reason. They put some food coloring in the rocket fuel, or they CGI'd it with the filter. But whatever they did, they decorated that launch to make it Halloweeny. They probably had the scent of pumpkin spice in the capsule. So my point is, and I wrote this on 10/18, I believe. I put this out there that they're suggesting a coming sacrificial event. So the movie's called Halloween Kills. So when I wrote this article here, I was saying there's going to be a sacrifice for the Halloween season. And at this same time, Kanye West, and now this is where it connects to the Rust event. At the same time, Kanye West was running around with a white mask on. It wasn't Shatner. He wasn't doing a publicity stunt for Halloween overtly. It wouldn't have made sense. But the mask he wore looked exactly like Halloween. So I'm going to pull this up, Kanye West mask. You can look it up now just on TV, on Google. And you can see he's always wearing these goofy masks, but the other day he was looking exactly like Michael Myers. I don't know what the objective was. I think it creeped a lot of people out. Another point about it was he was in front of a triangle that looked like the Illuminati pyramid, and he was posing. So they say he was going undercover, but you don't go undercover by putting on a gaudy disguise. Like, he was obviously meant to be seen here. So, back to what I was saying. Kanye West is looking like Michael Myers, while William Shatner is shooting himself into space. Halloween Kills comes out. And then Sir David Amos, one of Boris's pals, was knifed to death. He was stabbed to death. 17 times, in fact, which is kind of noteworthy. By the way, Boris ought to have his friend, David Amos, have him fed to the animals. You make that the start of it. He's like, we got to start giving nature some room on Earth. Let nature take over. Start feeding people to the animals. Start with one of your own pals. But yeah, here you have a very stabby public sacrifice around this time. Seems very ominous. Then you go a little further and we have this shooting. It might be noteworthy too that it's a 44, that Kanye's 44. Also, Kanye West's album release party had that church structure that looked exactly like the movie set of Rust. A few overlapping connections. It would probably take a mind map, and I don't want to look like the crazy conspiracy guy meme here, but I think the connections are pretty well established given the timing of everything. And yes, we had more or less said, expect some Halloween sacrifices, and we've had them. And I don't think it's over yet. In fact, there's a few more things that might be coming. Now, here's something else too. Captain Kirk did say when he went up very high, the Earth looked very fragile, and he said that there's going to be a catastrophic event. So that's another thing to consider too. He might be in the know about something, and I don't know if he was meant to let this slip, but Captain Kirk did tell us that there would be an incoming catastrophic event, and I think the implication here was that from way up there, it looks like we're fragile. So maybe we're going to be hit by something from above. Okay, I'm going through some comments. Child's Play, according to Tominoid, Child's Play 3 has a scene where Chucky swaps paint gun pellets with live ammo. They have a reboot TV series which has 311 in the first line. Also, Brandon means king or crow. Okay, that's fascinating. You got Brandon Lee, the crow, which sounds like, kind of crown, crow. And look, king and crown and corona have all been consistently associated in the symbolism that they use in their symbolic language. Phoenix, king, crown, corona, Christ are all synonymous symbols. And the phoenix, Burning Man. All these things are all connected. The symbolism of the phoenix, death and rebirth. Christ, death and rebirth. The burning man is just a phoenix. And of course the king, the crown. The Christ has the crown of thorns, another solar corona reference. Very consistent. And these names are significant in these things. It is highly significant too, I think, the number 13 being involved in the Rust event. About a 13-year-old accused of a murder or who commits an accidental murder. Lean Dion says there's lots of missing kid stories back in Australia at the moment. Perhaps a distraction from totalitarian mandates. Or maybe they're shipping them off to Mars, like Robert David Steele said. He's the ex-CIA, he said. He came across information that suggested children are being sent to Mars to work as slaves. And people laughed it off. Alex Jones didn't want to hear it. You would think Alex Jones would have been all over that. That's a great conspiracy theory. Oh, wow. NASA's actually kidnapping children and sending them to Mars as a slave workforce. But he just ignored it. And then NASA's public relations came out and said it's not true. And I thought, why did NASA's public relations have to come out and say this isn't true of all things? This is ridiculous. What kind of person's going to believe this, and why are they listening? What is NASA doing listening to Alex Jones? So it seemed like they were conspicuously covering this up. So I don't believe in space travel in that sense. I don't think they had the ability to send kids to Mars. But maybe they're sending them somewhere else, like Terramar, where Ghislaine Maxwell is a citizen. She's probably a queen out there. Maybe they've been sending them somewhere else for a long time. Mars in quotes. Maybe a deep underground base, deep space. I don't know. But nothing would surprise me at this point. I saw this article. It just showed you the interior of a mansion that Epstein has in New Mexico here. And apparently there's an elevator that goes to the basement where they send all the girls. And at the bottom of the elevator, at the bottom floor, when they open the doors, you have a 6 foot by 6 foot painting of Ghislaine Maxwell naked with a big knife. Okay, going through comments. Aqua Chiron says the UK MPMS was a hoax. Oh yeah, no doubt. Censorship was the agenda. I agree with you there. The agenda was he got radicalized by internet postings that made him think he had to kill this guy and stab him 17 times. That's why I pointed out the 17. It's a clear reference to the QAnon and the far right and ideological terrorism. Werner von Braun says, So I Married an Axe Murderer is a 1993 American romantic comedy directed by Thomas Schlemm and featuring Mike Myers. Myers plays Charles McKenzie, a man afraid of commitment, until he meets Harriet Travis, who works at a butcher shop and may be a serial killer. Unfamiliar, what's the connection there? It has to be deeper. Like someone in Discord, I think it was Jordan, pointed out, he said, hey, look, you got Jeff Bezos, looks like Dr. Evil. And Dr. Evil even has a rocket that looks like Jeff Bezos' rocket. Then you have Richard Branson, who in his younger years looked exactly like, I think he did, let me bring up a picture of this, but he looked exactly like Mike Myers in the movie. Let me bring this up. These ridiculous characters. Richard Branson actually also looks like he came out of the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is where Musk gets a lot of his 42 references from. But one of the characters in there, the space cowboy womanizer type, happens to look exactly like Richard Branson. Pretty strong resemblance. And I don't think it's unintentional, when they create these resemblances between television and fictional characters and real people. I mean, look what they did with Captain Kirk and William Shatner. They've effectively, merged these things. Hold on here, I'm going through some comments. Yeah, well, anyway, young Richard Branson did not look like the older version you see today. And if you look at him, tell me who he looks like to you. And I'll let all of you guess. You're looking at a young Richard Branson. Which Mike Myers character does he look like? I'll let someone in the comment section answer this. I think somebody here has it. Did somebody here say Austin Powers? Yes. So there's another connection. Austin Powers is a spitting image for young Richard Branson. And then, of course, you have the Dr. Evil and Bezos, totally connected. Salty says, yeah, baby, 100%. Look at the teeth. Now, I don't know if you consider this to be space, what they did. To me, they went into, free fall. Did they even go into space? Were they even high enough to experience the overjaw effect? How many of you know what the overjaw effect is? It's when you see something so beautiful, your jaw drops. Well, the astronauts all claim that they get so high that they see the Earth in all its fragility and their whole perspective changes. They have a cognitive shift and they become environmentalists and Democrats. And they come back down to save the world. Well, whenever Branson sent his people up, and Bezos too, but they always seem to exaggerate how awesome the view is by opening their mouths really wide. So a lot of people have actually taken to calling it the overjaw effect. It's so profound they can't shut their damn mouths. It's like lockjaw, but instead of your mouth being locked closed down, it's locked wide open. Mouth wide open. Maxwell Cooper says they went up 66.6 miles, no joke, to the top of the world. The symbolism, if you ask me, with Bezos going up there is King Bezos, Tower of Babel, going to the top of the tower, poking his head into the heavens. And that's the point where God knocks it down. And I think that's what comes next. That's why there's cracks in the ISS. That's why you have the communist senator Elizabeth Warren saying, we need to break apart Amazon. All right, let me see here. Again, going through comments. If you haven't seen it, it's 100% true that, yes, Richard Branson is a spitting image for Austin Powers, or he was. Here's some more interesting connections in terms of names and symbols. In 1986, the year of the Challenger explosion, Branson was on a boat called the Challenger, and he went across the Atlantic, which is even more interesting when you look at the storyline that William Cooper put together about the space shuttles, where he said that there was a story being told in the shuttle names. And I think this is one of the earliest examples of meta scripting that I've seen, where there's a story that's being told across time, across various platforms. But I believe the way he explained it, and this is William Cooper, who wrote Behold a Pale Horse, and he was someone who also said that these programs, like the Apollo program, were all just loaded with Masonic symbolism. But here's what he said. Now, this is from NASA Masonic Conspiracy Apollo Missions. And there's quite a lot here. Apollo 13, Aquarius New Age. Oh, this is interesting here. It flew off at 1:13 on April 13th. 13 is the number of law and death. I'm sorry, death and rebirth, reincarnation, sacrifice, the phoenix, the Christ, perfected soul imprisoned in matter, from the old to the new. Everything I was just saying, this is the group of symbols they use. And the 33 number, the age of Christ, it probably pertains to the vertebrae and the idea of the soul, the consciousness rising up the spine and illuminating the mind. And the 33 could also refer to maybe the temperature where ice melts, state change, solid becoming, fluid or something. Okay, here's another one. This is from William Cooper. Another revelation to those who understand the symbolic language of the Illuminati is hidden in the names of these space shuttles. A Columbian enterprise to endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis, and all challengers shall be destroyed. Now, in here he says the phoenix and the Christ, reincarnation, sacrifice. And like I said, the 13 years from the sacrifice of the Twin Towers to their resurrection. Well, challengers being destroyed. This is all interesting. The rocket took off at 1:13. The Challenger blew up at 1 minute and 13 seconds. So that's another 113. Again, common theme. There's quite a lot I could point out about these numbers and these symbols, but I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here. I like to keep things somewhat focused, because what we're doing here is just analyzing their language, their body of symbolism, and how they use it. I don't extrapolate anything beyond the obvious because I'm looking for patterns. If you want to read this article, NASA Masonic Conspiracy, the Apollo missions, go to fakeworld.news, and I'll post that at the top with everything else. Zareth says the fourth eye is the third eye, pineal gland, is the 33rd vertebrae, symbolically speaking. So yeah, that seems consistent. The symbolism is very consistent across the board. But this is an excellent breakdown according to William Cooper, who is another one of these interesting characters in the conspiracy realm. Some believe that Alex Jones killed him and replaced him so they could have a gatekeeper in place of someone who is actually divulging truth. And there may be something to it. I mean, nobody's more pro-space program than Alex Jones. So, for all his fighting for freedom, he's ultimately defending the Gulag system for the New Age. If you look at the screen, this is the Amazon plans for their new headquarters, and it's been compared to the Tower of Babel. Amazon has unveiled their plans for a new corporate headquarters for Arlington, Virginia, which will be across the Potomac River from D.C. It's a double helix, but scholars of ancient history and the Bible will readily recognize it as the ancient model for the Tower of Babel. Now, one more interesting thing about it, it's 3 buildings, 22 stories that are connected here. So 322 has some connections in Genesis. The Skull and Bones Society also focus on it, but I believe it's the part about man becoming as God. So it's about man's hubris, as is the Tower of Babel. And also think A to Z, everything. Think about the names of these things, kindle fire. Because if there's a big blackout, we could have something much worse than a supposed burning of a vast library. It would be a digital burning. And they're consolidating all the content. So not only are they censoring it, but they're probably going to burn it all when the tower falls. I think it's all symbolic, of course. New Perspective says, rest in peace, Jibby Jedi. Hope that's not true. If it's true, definitely agree, concur. He called in probably about a year and a half ago and was giving me some insights about how many people were in the know about how the flat earth movement was actually being controlled by a lot of people who were producing a television show in order to help, well, malign the entire topic so nobody would ever take it seriously enough to see where it leads. Because whatever you think about the shape of the world, even if you're convinced it's a spinning ball, if you open that can of worms, there are some worms that you just can't get back in the can, and some things you can't unsee unless you embrace willful ignorance. New Perspective, okay, well, that's sad to hear. I will probably follow up on that, and it sounds like it's real. You know, the only ones I really doubt are when it's someone who's conspicuously known for being anti-media, anti-authoritarian, dying because they didn't follow the directives of some media priest or expert. I still want to find out if it's true about Dr. Fauci being mean to dogs and monkeys. Alright everyone, thanks for joining. We're working on getting the 24/7 video stream back up here very soon. Although we will be playing on darkmatter.radio 24/7, so you can catch our replays there. It'll happen though probably within the next few days. There's a lot going on here. This is The Masquerade featuring Symbia. Thanks for joining. Phones will be back up any day now.
You have now entered the New World Order's AI construct, where nothing is as it seems. Your dreams and aspirations have been selected for you. All that makes you who you are was predetermined by the now functioning AI. Free thought is no longer an option. We now have control over all things, including the very thoughts we allow you to have. Do not try to resist. Welcome to the Masquerade.
Welcome to the masquerade.
Some sort of illusionary grid that we're living in. Still I'm entrenched in the thought that my thoughts are my own and I'm giving in. Tired of living with hypnotic psychosis of going through all of the social media motions. I don't care what you're posting in. Keep on scrolling through all of the propaganda. Keep on showing support. You're giving them the upper hand. You can find any info to support any truth that you wanna pursue it. Truth is subjective. I'm being selective and choosing the path and I knew it. Welcome to the masquerade. We're playing charades where the world has been staged like a play. The play is on the people. Either you wake up or succumb to the evil. When you succumb to the evil.
You are listening to Infinite Plane Radio. Stick around for live call-in shows. Stay for the music and recent replays. Join us at infiniteplane.live for 24/7 live chat with other listeners.
Better get down on your knees and